Hello and welcome to the Supernatural track here at Continual. I'm your host, Gail Z. Martin, and tonight we are talking about the witches of Supernatural. But before we dive into that, let's let our wonderful panelists introduce themselves, starting with Carole.
Hi, I'm Carolyn Stokes. I've been a fan since season 3. I started writing fanfic in 2012, and all of that can be found on AO3 under Fire Sign 10.
Lola.
I'm Lola Lariscy. You can find me online, Lola Lariscy. And I've been a fan of Supernatural from the beginning because I would watch everything on the WB/Supernatural. And I loved it.
Okay, Melissa.
Hi, I'm Melissa. I have been a fan since the pilot originally aired. You can find me on Twitter at Thea_Deans_girl, where I'm talking about all kinds of supernatural stuff and writing some not safe for work tweets.
Anne.
Hi, I'm Ann Wicker, and I'm a latecomer to the Supernatural fandom, but I went completely down the rabbit hole and just went to my first con last year. So anyway, I enjoyed talking about Supernatural and being in the group Team Free Will North Carolina, run by Gail.
And I'm Gail Z. Martin and Morgan Bryce. I write epic and urban fantasy as Gail, and urban fantasy male paranormal romance as Morgan. But in all my modern worlds, they're ones where Sam and Dean could walk in and feel right at home. I'm also a latecomer, like Anne said. And once I started watching, I haven't stopped yet, and I hope I never do. I do run the Supernatural TFWNC group here on Facebook, and I also am a staff writer for the Winchester Family Business blog. So yes, definitely down that rabbit hole right there with Anne. All right, so Supernatural and witches. At the very beginning of the show, we've heard Dean say, man, I hate witches, really hates witches. It just doesn't want anything to do with them. And by season 15, we have Sandwich, who pretty much is Rowena's heir. How did we get there from here? Which is something we often ask about many things in Supernatural. But let's kind of talk, before we get into all the wonderful witches, how did the boys go from one extreme to the other? Karen?
Well, I think as we see in many instances, as time and experience wore on, they encountered people who were not bad witches. I mean, just as we saw their journey through realizing that not all monsters were bad monsters, they found out not all witches were bad witches. There were witches who were helpful. There were witches who were actually just wanted to stay out of things. They were just like, just leave me alone. Let me do my little thing. So I think it was just, time went on, experience taught them that things continue to not be black and white. And there was a wider range possible, even within witches and their skeevy bodily fluids.
Yes, this is true. Not like there weren't bodily fluids galore and every other kind of creature they hunted.
True. And the other thing, if I can jump in, is that, Bobby used spells. They used spells. Now, they might not have used hex bags, but Missouri used hex bags when she was trying to, decontaminate their old home place there in Lawrence, in that episode. And Missouri certainly wasn't, we don't think Missouri was a witch, but they certainly made use of spells to the good. And, the good witch and the bad witch were all conditioned to that from the Wizard of Oz.
Mm-hmm. Melissa?
Although we don't ever see, or at least I don't recall ever seeing John bad-mouthing witches, you got to think of where would Sam and Dean's original impressions been informed? from how they were raised. And so, like all of us, if we're raised in a certain way with certain beliefs, as we go out and experience the world and as we grow up, we tend to see that sometimes those beliefs that we got from our upbringing weren't quite the reflection of the reality that we're in today. It might have been true back then, not necessarily true now. So to me, we see it's Sam and Dean's opinion shifting is a sign of them growing up, them maturing, them experiencing the world, kind of what Carole was saying. And also it's practical. Using magic is practical for their jobs. It's helpful, it's useful, it's just another tool, the way that the grenade launcher is, the way the baby is, it's a tool for them to access. And Sam's skill just gives them one more piece in their toolbox to help fight what they need to fight to get the job done. So to me, I felt it was a believable arc.
Okay, Lola.
Excellent points. They all use witchcraft, and for them to have such a smug, stuck-up attitude about witchcraft is really sucky of them. You know, I'm looking at the supernatural.fandom.com because, you know, every TV show that deals with this type of stuff has their own lore about witches. And I just wanted to double check, according to this website, witches are human. They are human. They're not monsters. They happen to have abilities, or they've learned through training how to use forces to make things happen. So to think that the Winchesters are killing them, well, they're killing humans. They're killing just regular people who happen to have some gifts. And it's kind of sucky when you think about it. So I'm very happy to say over 15 years, they did kind of change their direction a little on that.
And it's interesting because you brought up people who either were born to magic or learned it. And that does seem to be, they've never really come out and said, well, you have to be born a witch. People seem to be able to learn it. And so we have Bobby using a lot of spells. We occasionally see Dean using spells. So you can't even say, well, Sam was Rowena's heir of power because of, you know, he started out with the demon blood and he really didn't even need the demon blood. He had something special about him. But apparently this is something that can be learned and accessed without needing any special abilities, which I think is kind of interesting as magical lore goes, because so many series and franchises, you know, you have to be born with it. You have people who are not born with much, the pure bloods and the mud bloods from Harry Potter. That doesn't seem to be really an issue with the way magic is handled here, which, as Lola brought up, says a lot about who some of the witches are. So let's look at some of those before we get into it. Before we get into the whole long list of all the witches, who were some of your favorites aside from Rowena? Because we all love Rowena. So other than Rowena, who were some of your favorites? Good guys or bad guys?
Well, I happen to really like Patrick. I mean, I just thought that he was cool. He knew what he wanted, kind of, and he wasn't all bad. You know, he let the one old guy, you know, win so he could see his bat mitzvah or bar mitzvah of his grandchildren or whatever. And so, and you know, and he let the woman go because she was no longer happy. And so Patrick was probably my next favorite.
Okay. Anybody else? Jump in.
I'd second on Patrick. I thought he was just great. And for a one shot, you know, pretty well formed. You know, he had a lot of depth to his character as opposed to some of them where, you know, they were just kind of two-dimensional. Really, though, there's not a lot of really favorable witches. I mean, we definitely have the people doing spells like Nora Havelock, who learned to do spells and whose son had been possessed and everything. You know, she was certainly on the side of the hunters. The Baines twins were on the side of the hunters, and But a lot of, then there's a lot of them who are just kind of out for themselves. So of course they are less sympathetic, although not without amusement, such as Don and Maggie Stark, who is
Oh,
the
yeah.
James Marsters in Charisma Carpenter witch couple. And they were certainly out for themselves and rather venal, but they were pretty amusing too.
And in the end, he came in and saved them from the Leviathan guy. Plus, it was just entertaining to me, being an old Buffy fan, seeing those two
Absolutely.
together.
Absolutely.
I just loved those two and how they played off each other. And obviously the actors had history together as well as the characters, and just trying to envision, well, after 700 years of being married to somebody, I'm sure you'd have some, sore spots to deal with.
Some bumps in the road.
Yeah, some bumps, some issues. So yeah, I thought that was really funny. Melissa and Lola, what about you?
Melissa,
You're on mute.
Once again, sorry about that. That same couple, and I wasn't a Buffy fan. I had enough of a Buffy knowledge to recognize that those two were on the show. But the chemistry there was just phenomenal, and it was fun. It was a fun, lighthearted, rompy kind of episode, and it wasn't all doom and gloom. I love them because it was just fun.
Okay. Lola?
All right, now, if I prepared, I wouldn't be hesitating and hemming and hawing, but I'm looking up to make sure she's a witch. I'm pretty sure she is. The lady from Downton Abbey, and she plays the witch from Hansel and Gretel, and her name is Katya. That's right, Katya. Yeah. And if I remember correctly, wasn't she an old compatriot of Rowena's?
No, she was sent by the Grand Coven to get Rowena back.
I knew she had something to do with Rowena. She had been sent there from Germany or whatever to get Rowena back, but she's the witch from Hansel and Gretel. And she's got the whole, whoo, my pretties, let me make you some pudding. I'm gonna fatten you up and all that stuff. And that's creepy. That's just really creepy. And I'm like, yeah. And and Melissa's been smoking the ganja, but yeah. But it's really creepy. And so she's memorable. I can't really say I like her, but she's memorable. She sticks out to me.
One of the witches that I thought was kind of poignant in that he was doing what he did for a friend, but he wasn't really taking into consideration the full effect of what he was doing on other people, was Charlie the magician in Chris Angel is a Douchebag. He was protecting his friend, but it was killing other people. And his friend didn't want to be protected at that cost. So I thought that was a very poignant episode and a very poignant character, because not like the Winchesters have ever done anything for anybody else to save them that they didn't want. Parallels. We have a bunch of witches that show up throughout the series. I'm still wondering about the one who ended up as a hamster. I thought that was kind of interesting. The one that
Buffy, that's kind of
right out of Buffy.
No, yeah, that's totally right out of Buffy.
The mean one from the Mega Coven who wasn't nice to Rowena, so she turned her into a hamster, and then Crowley kept her in a hamster cage.
I forgot about that one.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Totally right.
That was fun. One of the first witches we see is in Something Wicked, and that's the pediatrician, the doctor, who is the Striga. So I wasn't sure whether we counted him as a witch or a monster. They had him listed with the witches, but I wasn't exactly sure. Did he conjure the Striga, or was that part of him?
I really thought he was a monster, because the Striga was him and he was it. I mean, it was just like another form of him. So I was really surprised to see him listed under the witches. Because yeah, I would have said he's a
Yeah.
being, not someone performing spells and such. Where everybody else, I think it's really clear that their magic lay in performing spells and rituals, so not even
And
not
human.
even not even Super Wiki necessarily has everything.
Right.
The wiggle room. But I think the rest of them were certainly pretty clear. And I think one of the real hallmarks of the witches is a lot of them are just really out for themselves. They became a witch if they weren't intrinsically a witch. Let me qualify that. You have your witches who were born, and that's just part of who they are, like the Starks. And then you have the people who've become witches. The reason they became witches is they wanted things. And so that's a real hallmark, I think, of the learning type witches, is that they wanted something, they saw that this was a way to achieve it, and they went after it. And in most cases, it went awry. It either didn't go as they planned, or it made them really go evil, or, just, there were not happy endings for those situations generally.
Now, one of the families that, again, not sure whether it's born into at a certain point or made, it kind of suggested that it was born into, were the Laughlins, in regarding Dean, the ones who cursed him with the memory curse. They seem to come from a witch lineage, where Rowena was the one who either took whatever small talent and magnified it, or just learned how to be a witch because she was stubborn. And that was a real interesting juxtaposition between, maybe a hereditary witch family and somebody clawing their way up from the bottom. Any thoughts about the Laughlins?
Yeah, I just watched that episode yesterday, and it was interesting to hear Rowena explain that they had come over from the old country, and I don't think they specified which old country, but that they had come over from the old country and were part of a witch family dynasty kind of thing, and that she had gone to them as she was trying to figure out her gifts and that sort of thing. And because she was a penniless, waif or whatever at that point, they just kicked her out. And they thought they were better than she was, and then, it was a class kind of thing, mm-hmm. which was very human, and I guess there's, classes in the witch dynasties too. But I thought that they just sort of evolved into being very selfish and very, the woman was, I forget her name, Katrina,
Mm-hmm.
something, was, bent on taking, revenge against the accountant that had cheated him out of some money or something, and her brothers kept telling her that would draw the attention of the hunters. And the Plum Sisters were like that too. They had been taught by their mother to, if they killed somebody, to make it look like an accident or like a human killing and not like a magical killing, because that would draw the attention of the hunters.
Yeah. One of the witches or pair of witches I wish we could have seen more of, I really hoped until the very end that they might make a reappearance, was the Barnes, Max and Tasha Barnes.
Baines.
Baines, yes, thank you.
I always say Barnes too, so that's why.
But I would have loved to have seen what happened to them. They did such a Sam and Dean thing by reviving her in that wicker person. How'd it go for them? What happened? I would have loved to have found that out.
And
I
that's,
thought-
there's a big fanfic avenue. They were very popular, I think, just among viewers in general. But it was definitely something a lot of writers ran with.
Mhm.
You know, they were interesting, they were charismatic, you know, and they were witchy, but on the hunter, all on the hunter end. Didn't Asa Fox, he was their father, right?
Right,
He
yeah.
was their father.
Yes.
So they were clearly on the hunter side. So yeah, there's lots of, they feature in a lot of stories there. You can definitely search out some stuff there with them.
Mhm.
I think when I had
Yeah.
rewatched that at one point, I was actually really surprised. I had really kind of forgotten that was what happened to her.
Mhm.
You know, that
Yeah.
they went ahead and they brought her back, and I was kind of like, oh.
It's a very Winchester thing to do. Now we also, you know, one of the other witches who played a very big role in the show was Ruby. And we found out that she was a witch when she was human. Thoughts on that? Because she was not a good girl.
It's kind of interesting because we're so used to just thinking of her as a demon. And I think by the time we even found out in Malleus Maleficarum, right?
Mhm.
And
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
she was still Katie Cassidy, I believe, at that point.
Mhm.
You know,
Yeah.
we hadn't switched actresses, but even then, it was still like a really big surprise because we just kind of took it for granted. She was just like a regular run-of-the-mill human who became a demon. So to find out even a witch could become a demon was kind of a little shocking. It was like, oh, they are susceptible as well. And you know, that would have been a really interesting thing to explore more again, is like what would have been that backstory. I wouldn't have minded finding out more about Ruby's backstory and how, you know, with being a witch, and then how did she go from becoming a witch into becoming a demon. You know, unfortunately, she was really crafted just to be a tool for this one particular storyline, so we never got that. But that could have been really interesting.
Yeah, it would have been interesting to see, did she become a demon because using her witchcraft, she used it for evil and so she doomed herself to hell? Or somewhere in there, did she make a deal like Bella did, where it was a deal of expedience and she still owed the piper, but there was a good reason for the deal that might not have had anything to do with being a witch?
Yeah.
True.
We'll never
Yeah.
know.
Yeah. Well, especially since we've seen, particularly with Rowena, but certainly with others, that if you were powerless and voiceless and oppressed, magic was perhaps your only option for vengeance or justice or just surviving.
Right.
Absolutely.
So yeah, I agree. It would have been interesting to have seen some of that backstory with Ruby, although we weren't supposed to be sympathetic to her. I think that was the point.
Yeah, and that could have been a big factor, but you know, the inquiring mind is always like, what's happening behind that? As opposed to, you know, going back to Malleus Maleficarum, the other witches were all like, you know, suburban ladies who were just doing little spells so that they could win the craft fair and get a better mortgage rate. You know, which is not to say those are not very practical goals. However,
The bunco group with benefits, yeah.
Yeah.
That is so totally suburban.
oh man.
Bring the wine, bring the cauldron, bring the dice. We'll all have a good Tuesday night. Yeah.
And then we'll have finger sandwiches after.
That's right.
Literally.
Made with
wine spritzers.
Oh man.
One of the witches that I thought really played into a lot of the fairy tales and the stereotypes, aside from the Hansel and Gretel witch, was the Wicked Witch of the West in the Wizard of Oz episode. I mean, she was scary. She was right up there with the Striga as being scary.
She was, and you know, I just remember being terrified of the witch in the globe when Dorothy's there in the witch's castle going, "Oh, Annie M," and then it morphs into the witch's big face. I can remember being terrified as a child. So making her, you know, so terrifying and not being able to talk, you know, that was really good.
That was
They
really
did a good job with that character.
Yeah. That was somebody who really brought the, I'm not sure who the actress was, but she really played the role beautifully.
I thought it was really interesting that she didn't talk, you know, because it really, everything from her had to be physical, you know, her expressions and her emotions and everything. And she was so creepy, you know, doing that. Yeah, she was terrific.
And they didn't want to go down the road of making it too much of a cliche of having her, you know, talk about my pretty and I'll get you my pretty and your little you know, I mean,
my pretty and your little brother too.
Mm-hmm.
Well played, Carol. Well played.
Thank you.
I thought it was a fresh take on it that made it even scarier. And as we've said on other panels, the whole Oz thing is a storyline I wish they'd have done more with, even if it was just that Charlie came and went, but they didn't kill her. She's off in Oz doing things. It would have been wonderful to have had that. And she could have come back and given them reports from Oz. They didn't even involve any CGI. Just
we could have had some crossover.
Yeah.
You know, we could have had, that just occurred to me, like, oh, pot bunnies. You know, Cowardly Lion could have come to visit.
Or the Tin Man.
Or the Tin Man.
Or Toto could have chased Dean around the bunker.
That would have been cute.
You know what? I'm not kidding. When I watched Yellow Fever the first time, that's actually who I thought it was, Toto, because it was a little Yorkie with the little bow, you know, and I was like, yes. Oh, it's like Toto.
Yeah, I was going to say Dean has a history with Yorkies, so
yeah.
Oh yeah, because then there's the Yorkie that they had to scratch his belly, right?
His belly.
Yeah.
Well, there's one I watched where he's trying to get in a building that's on fire, and he goes to the fireman. He says, "My apartment is you know."
Oh yeah.
Got a Yorkie, and he's going to have to pee.
It's nervous. They like to have dogs in magic too, because also don't we have Dean going through the magic spell to talk to dogs.
The dogs.
You know, and then of course we have the, in many ways questionable, however, we have the white witch hunter who became a white witch and his familiar, who was a beautiful lady and also a dog.
Which that whole, and I agree, problematic in many ways, but also incredibly funny with that scene where Sam meets Dean at the door and is all apologetic. And I didn't realize, I'm sorry I let her on the bed, but she just wants her belly rubbed.
Yep.
And then she was like so gorgeous, you know, she's like drop dead gorgeous and glamorous and stuff. That was great.
That was a good setup for that.
And then of course Dean being spelled to be a dog was hilarious.
Mm-hmm.
And we never found out the dog subplot. We never found out the dog's secret agenda.
Yep.
Yeah.
So, but there's an instance, yes, of them using spells. I mean, they just use spells all the time. You're right. Bobby did, Dean did, of course Sam did, but you know.
And even going back in the Men of Letters, even going back to Cuthbert, I can't ever say his name right.
Cuthbert
Sinclair. You know, he was all about using all those spells to keep the bunker safe, all the, you know, along with the ward. I mean, the wards are spells, really.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And
Absolutely.
And, you know, and that made me think today when I was going over stuff, I was thinking that, you know, did he consider himself a witch or not? We don't know. Another avenue that could have been, you know, explored that was not.
Right.
Well,
I
and he
mean,
worked particularly nasty magic on that Werther box.
Yeah.
Yes.
that was creepy. That was so creepy. That was super
Yeah.
creepy.
Yeah.
But even Henry Winchester used that spell to get away from Abaddon, where he went in the closet, he came out their closet, you know, he went
Oh,
in
true.
his
Yeah.
closet and came out, you know, Sam and Dean's closet. You know, that's all spells.
It almost feels like, especially with the men of letters, them using spells is fine because they're not witches and they're just doing it for whatever fancy dancy reason. They're justifying their use of spells, which we know that the men of letters were not exactly, all of them were not exactly great people to begin
They're
with.
wankers. Every one of them wankers. They're wankers. That's their term, not mine.
And
But you're right. They good for them, but bad for anybody else.
Exactly.
And you know,
a lot of
let's
double
face it,
standards there.
the Men of Letters was an old boys club. So again, great if you're a guy using these spells, but if you're one of those women, well, you're a witch.
Well, and therein lies the, you know, harking back as far as you want to go, that, you know, women and witchcraft and the use of that power, and, you know, the theories of all that power stemming in fact from womanhood and, you know, the power to create
Healing.
life and
Yep.
all of that kind of
Yeah.
stuff. And
Mhm.
you know, let's just go, you know, zip back, you know, all the way to kitchen witches back
Brownie.
in the
Yeah.
forests of Germany, or, you know,
Yeah.
the plains of Spain or anywhere.
Well,
And that's
we
just the European stuff. I just realized I just really
Yeah.
categorized that as European, and that's not even
Well,
addressing
That-
The
other
American.
cultures, countries, continents, and their own witchcraft traditions.
Mhm.
but hopefully other cultures embraced it more, unlike the, you know, Europe where they burned people, and you know, later America.
It depends on the culture and the time period for the culture.
That's true.
Some of them did for a while. Others looked at it very differently. So yeah, it's kind of a mixed bag. We even got to meet Baba Yaga by season 15. So pulled in one of the more famous witch legends there.
We didn't see the house though, right? Did we? On the chicken
No,
leg? Chicken
I
leg.
feel
house?
like I
Yeah,
missed
she
out.
did a little bit there.
House with the chicken legs. Gotta have that.
Chicken legs.
Right.
And I liked how they brought in some of these more, for lack of a better word, I'll say historical witches, like Baba Yaga, like the Wicked Witch of the West, you know, witches that we had met in history and culture.
Right.
Well,
You know, like they've done that with so many things in Supernatural, and here even with the witches too, because it lends it almost like a little more weight, you know, like a little more believability
Mhm.
as far as that kind of thing can go.
yeah. Well, you know, you're exactly right, Carol. It's not just the witches, it's a lot of other things. I mean, the Mark of Cain and all of those sorts of things are and I think in another panel we talked about how, you know, Bloody Mary,
Mhm.
those other urban legends, which I'm blanking on right at the moment. You know, the scarecrow is
Yeah.
used in all kinds of lore. The woman in white.
Right.
And so those kinds of urban legends, like you said, lend it more depth, lend it more believability, because those are things that a lot of us who have been steeped in that since we were kids, you know, we go, oh yeah,
it's it's that familiarity, and
Yeah.
it just it helps you fall into the story more
Mhm.
easily when they're playing off of something that you have some sort of level of familiarity with, I think.
Mhm.
And so if like with the woman in white, it's like, oh yeah, you're familiar with that legend. And so right there, it's like, oh, I'm gonna hear some stories of things that I already know, and I'm gonna see how they play out. And it helps cement the legends that they deal with that you're not familiar with, at
Mhm.
least to me. It's like,
Yeah.
you've got this bank of, here are the stories, here are the witches we're familiar with, here are the stories that we're familiar with. And that sort of helps bridge the gap into the pieces that you're not familiar with.
It's less of an info dump. If it was 15 seasons of stuff we're not familiar with, we might be like, okay, I can't keep this all in my head, But with the strings of things we're familiar with, we can, cast that aside and be like, we already know about that, and that leaves room for their own lore that they're making up.
Well, the other thing about urban legends and myths is that this is a story that has been refined and polished by many authors over many, many years. And so they've all brought little pieces to it, polished the story up, added a little here, taken a little out. So the story is a solid thing by the time it gets passed down. It's a good story, and it keeps getting told because it resonates. So that already brings a depth when you draw on that, if you do it at all faithfully, because not only is it familiar, but it's had centuries of beta readers to perfect it. So that makes it a really potent story, and it wouldn't keep getting told if it didn't touch something in the audience. It would be one of the things that was forgotten.
Right.
Yeah.
I think
One of the witches we haven't talked about was Sonia, who was the hairdresser who was out to punish cheating men.
Oh yeah.
Oh yeah.
That's one of the episodes where like I had to watch it like a few times because I just couldn't kind of follow the storyline. I was just like, what? I like it because it starts off one thing and it kind of turns into another. But so she's from another culture. That was from like
the Quarry, which I think was
yes.
Middle East.
I was going to say, yeah, like Turkish or Arabian or something in that area, so that was something that would have been unfamiliar to many of us, although perhaps not other viewers, but at least, yes, still had kind of that basis.
And as I recall, she made up her own, she was like modifying her own spells or modifying spells that she knew from her culture, but then she was putting her own spin on it to get revenge on cheating husbands or whatever.
Now, one of the other, go ahead, Carol.
Well, just, along those lines, that when we saw the witches doing magic, we saw a lot of things that we would see recurring, like hex bags. There was often different kinds of bowls, like gold ones or brass ones or sacred ones or, tinfoil ones or whatever. And you would have to have your ingredients, and then there would be fire or there would be smoke, or you'd have to drip blood. But there was kind of a consistency to the structure. So you didn't, we never saw wand stuff. Nobody ever did a wand. It went ta-da, but it was, incantations, but also having physical materials that you had to work. And even the incantations, like, I watched Charmed, okay, but one of the things that just, like, one of the many things that strained belief, besides their bodices, was they would just like sit down with a pen and they would be like, I'm gonna write a spell and he's a booger and ta-da. And I guess that's a different kind of maybe interpretation of a very fluid magic. But I liked here that there was a lot of Latin and there was drawing on different elements. And I know for me as a writer, then when I have to write a spell or a ritual, man, I work on that sucker.
Right.
You know, am I writing a real one? Of course not. But I really am like, what elements can I put in here that make it feel and sound and, you know, impart the strength of the magic that I want to have happening here? And I thought Supernatural always did that really, really well. You know, they might be using some ordinary ingredients, but they still also threw in a little eye of newt here and a little toad there.
They made it familiar because all of the things that they did in the show are kind of what we expect from witches that are not in the Harry Potter sect, because Harry Potter was all wand magic. But when you think about it, like at least most of American experience about when you see and read and hear about witches, it's the bowls and the ingredients and there's candles and there's an incantation. All of that stuff that they showed on Supernatural was all very familiar. So I don't have to work as hard to believe what you're doing, because the magic that you're showing is what I expect magic to look like and sound like. So I don't have to, I'm sorry, if they were waving wands around, I would have been out, because, you know, I know that they do it in Harry Potter, but that's not the magic that
Only if they're in Oz. Only if they're in Oz. That's the only time.
Yes. Oz is different.
Gwendolyn, the good witch.
But see, Oz to me is make-believe versus Supernatural was supposed to be set in the real world.
Mm-hmm.
So, and like Harry Potter, I think that's why I draw a line with the Harry Potter. It's because that's not set in the real world, that's set in an alternate universe, versus Supernatural to me was set in our world. Mm-hmm. So the magic to me looked like I would expect magic to look like. And it just helped suspend my disbelief.
Mm-hmm.
They've been waving wands, I would have been out.
Well, and I think it's kind of funny, Carol, hearing you talk about that, they used Latin, sometimes, like with the Golem, it was Hebrew, sometimes it was Arabic. And it suddenly clicked to me that they were kind of doing high church magic with the liturgies and the rituals.
Yes.
In comparison to, if you've read Jim Butcher's Harry Dresden Files, it's all about intent. The words don't matter. So Harry never has to memorize spells, and he can say things to light candles like flickum bickus, because it's all about intent. And I could see Dean doing that, flickum bickus.
That's all he needs.
But it's almost a high church magic with the ritual and the liturgy and the language.
No, you're right. It's a great call out. That's exactly what it is.
It is. And I loved that they also were very respectful of the different grimoires that they used. The Black Grimoire, and there was another one.
The Book of the Damned.
Book of the Damned.
Book of the Damned. And then the Codex to the Book of the Damned. They were always very respectful of those sorts of things and made use of those, like you said, in sort of a high church sort of way. And that was really interesting to me. And it was, hex bags, of course, were all the way through, that they used even themselves. But there was one thing that got me, and it's inconsistent, and I'm going to bring it up and we'll see if we can puzzle it out. In regarding Dean, when Sam first consults Rowena, she says that theoretically, if you kill the witch, it should break the spell. But Dean had killed the witch and it didn't break the spell. And so that could be a function of which spell it was, because I was wondering, because back in About a Boy, they killed the witch, but Tina still didn't go back to her proper age.
Right.
So
it might just be one of those things where, it depends on the spell. And like, you could probably say in 85% of the cases, killing the witch is enough. But then you've got that other 15% where the spell has transcended the actual witch or has been set into motion in a way that can't simply be stopped that directly or easily, you know. But at least it's the lesser, it's the out of the norm to have that happen. And happily, most of the time you can kill the witch and have everything, revert.
Well, it could have been very much the tradition of witchcraft used, because the witch in About a Boy was definitely coming from the Germanic side of things.
Right, yeah.
Where the Laughlin witches were Scottish, Great Britain, coming from a different magical tradition. So I can see that making a difference as well. As well as maybe the skill of the witch. Maybe a more seasoned witch could create spells that would outlive them if they cared to go that far. So
well,
yeah,
the witch in About a Boy, that's the witch we were talking about before, right, Katja? She was definitely a powerful witch. My thinking with that is maybe once the girl was altered to become older, maybe she just couldn't alter back. Even after the Katja was killed, it was sunk in that she was older and her body wouldn't revert back. I don't know.
or younger in her case. She didn't want to go back to being a grown-up.
That's right. I got it mixed up.
Well, and maybe
yeah.
maybe it did depend on, to some extent, on the will, because Dean had a powerful reason to age up, and she didn't want to go back to that.
She was kind of happy to have a chance to start over.
Yeah.
And do it again and be sadder but wiser.
Makes sense.
As we're talking through it, one thing occurs to me. If it's a spell that I'm going to want to outlive me, then I'm going to set it up that way. And maybe I'm a powerful witch, but if I'm a less powerful witch, that spell might need me to keep putting energy into it after it's been cast to maintain its effects. And so that's why if I'm dead, then the spell ceases, versus if I'm a powerful enough witch, I can front load that power into the spell. And it doesn't matter where I am or whether I'm alive or dead.
I got it.
Popped into
I
my
got
head.
it. It's like a website where you mirror a website somewhere else. So if it goes down here, it's still in Romania. It's like that. The spell, she had someone else mirror it. So as long as the other person is up, it still exists.
And I completely forgot that Rowena cast that spell on her apartment to kill everybody but Sam, who came in there. And that
Good point.
outlived her.
Yeah. Well, and Cuthbert Sinclair's spells lasted after his death with the Werther box.
The Werther Project.
Yeah.
We're almost out of time, but I've got to mention Delta, the Craigslist witch, the one that Mrs. Tran hired off Craigslist.
Oh,
Ended up
to make demon bombs.
Never hire a witch off Fiverr. I mean, really.
That was hilarious.
that was hilarious.
Yeah.
I just thought that was such a perfect thing of, you can buy anything on Craigslist. Why not buy a witch, spell? You might not get what you want, but hey, it was cheap.
There it was.
Well, folks, to no surprise, we've blown through our time, but we've had a great conversation. So thank you very much for all of that. But before we leave, let's tell everybody where they can find you online, starting with you, Ann.
You can find me on Facebook as Ann Wicker, and on Twitter as Ann Wicker with no spaces, on Instagram as Ann.Wicker2, and anytime in the Team Free Will NC group and on Continual.
Melissa?
You can find me here on Continual talking about supernatural or occasionally the boys. On Twitter, Bia_Deans_girl, not safe for work, conversation about supernatural.
Lola?
You can find me just about everywhere. Lola Lariscy, Lariscy. If you Google me, you'll find me, but you'll also find a bunch of dead old ladies. I'm related to all of them, but I'm not one of them yet.
Carole?
Fingers crossed.
Carole M. Stokes on Facebook. I'm often on continual panels. I'm in the TFWNC group. On Twitter, I am true_firesign10. And all of my fiction is on AO3 under firesign10. Mind to the tags.
Yes. Yes.
And I'm pretty easy to find at gailzmartin.com, morganbryce.com. I am on Pinterest and TikTok at Morgan Bryce Author. I'm on Twitter with both 2 accounts, both names, pretty easy to find on everything else if you just look for the names. Of course, I run the Supernatural TFWNC group on Facebook. I write for the Winchester Family Business, but most of the time you can find me here on Continual. So thank you so much for being with us tonight. And thanks to all of you for watching and listening. There'll be more Supernatural coming up soon. So we'll see you online.